My apologies. You had it on here properly. Oh, there we go. Okay. So how many people would agree with the Germans, or sorry, not the Germans, the German food bank, that the decision should be based on the fact that we're going to start with Germans and give Germans first? Anyone agree with that position? Nobody in this entire room agrees with that position? Okay, one. Not just because I'm asking, right? You actually do agree with it? Okay, good. So all the rest of you disagree with that position, correct? Am I to understand that correctly? Okay, so you're on your own, man. Okay, why do you think they were justified, the German food bank, to say we will choose German first when we're going to distribute our food?
Because it's their own citizens. They pay tax.
Okay, they're their own citizens. They pay tax. Okay, who wants to give him a response? I'm sure everyone wants to jump up and be like, "Oh, I got this guy." All right. So I think the sister's hand was up, and then we'll. Yes.
I just want to qualify question. Are all of them equal in terms of socioeconomic need?
I think that so.
You're only basing it on.
So we're assuming that the need is the same, but it's just basically how do we distribute this limited food that we have.
And they're all of the same need. Then
Yeah.
I agree with them.
Okay, so you have someone else in your camp. Okay, good. We have two people in that camp. Yes, you disagree?
Yeah, I disagree.
Okay, you've got to respond to. What was your name again? Sorry. Abdullah. So give him a response. Your name is
Hamza.
Hamza. So Hamza,
So my
tell Abdullah why he's wrong.
So my understanding is I'm not sure what their system is, but for citizen or not citizen, for tax wise, you have to pay taxes. Even if you work illegally, you have to pay taxes. But when it comes to get benefits, the Germans are getting benefits, but the illegal or whatever, not Germans, they're not getting benefits. So that's their own source to get food or supplies or whatever from the government, being illegal or being not citizens.
Okay. So Abdullah, what are you going to say to Hamza here?
I mean, that's the whole idea of a citizen, is that you get some priority in some things and some
Okay. So citizenship should have some benefits, is what you're saying. Okay. Anyone else want to respond beside Hamza? Yes. Bismillah. And sorry, what was your name again? Khalid. Okay.
Human beings get hungry.
Yes.
They're all human beings. So whoever is in need of food more is
Okay.
not necessarily a German or non-German. It's the human being who's hungry.
Okay. Okay.
Making the criteria based on Germans, it really has little to do with the mission of the food bank to begin with, which is
Okay.
feeding hungry.
So would you say like a first come, first serve?
I would say, probably the ones who are least likely to be able to help themselves get food, like the elderly, for instance, okay, the very young, the ones who can make it.
Okay.
If I'm going to create a criteria,
Yeah.
I would say the ones who are less likely to forage food on their own.
So like the elderly, you said.
Yeah, the ones who are in more need of that food, help, as a human being.
Okay. All right. Abdullah, you wanna? So sorry, you also supported Abdullah in this position, right?
I thought we agreed that they were of equal need.
Yeah. So that's what we said. Relatively equal need. So okay, maybe there's some difference in old and young, but generally here we're talking, German or non-German, they're equal in need.
Also,
So
Germans have benefits, they're less likely to go hungry than somebody who's coming with maybe not even an ID.
Yeah, but again, the article doesn't mention that, so I don't know. I can't really say. But based on what the article is saying, we're saying the needs are pretty much similar, right? That there's poor Germans and poor refugees wherever they're coming from. So in that case, how do you decide? So sorry, you wanted to...
No, I just wanted to clarify that.
Okay, all right.
I think that's very important because I agree with him.
Okay.
That it should be first need.
Okay. So this particular... so we have so the people that side with the idea that it should not be Germans first, I'm looking for a really good reason why that's the case, right? So yes.
Well, not necessarily the reason why it's not the case. But I look at it from a psychological perspective and the theory of people outgroup. I can see how the German, that's a group, wanted to take care of their own. Psychologically, as a human, tendencies to do that. And it's been proven theory. But human also can transcend those tendencies. And that's where it comes, morality. Is it the right thing to just care for your group, or there's others conditions that we have to look into before making that decision? I
Okay.
can understand where he's coming from, but also I can see that we can transcend that as well.
Okay, and your name is?
Hi.
Say Khalid and Khalid. How many Khalids we have here? No, okay. All right, Abdullah, what are you going to say to Khalid, Athani?
We're not exactly dealing with the best, like, circumstances and scenarios. Like, the truth is, there's not going to be, you said limited, so there's
Okay.
not going to be enough food for everyone.
Okay,
So somebody can.
sure, okay.
So I think any nation would prioritize its citizens.
Okay, so what about his point about, well, psychologically we get that, but we should transcend that?
So don't feed our citizens, and because if we feed, I'm guessing just based off of what you said,
Yeah.
it means somebody can't eat, right?
Yeah, obviously, that's the whole point, is that food is limited.
If
The expert in the food bank here. So I'm going to get his take in just a second, inshallah. Anyways, go ahead.
one refugee fed is one citizen not fed.
In a sense, yeah, sure. Okay, yep.
So I think any nation would obviously,
For its citizens.
Yeah, for its citizens. First.
So here's the question. So ethically, why is that ethically okay to do that? That would be the question. Yeah.
Maybe the refugees are getting more assistance from the government?
So we don't know that. That's not part of the, so we can't say that. That's superfluous assumptions. Yeah.
I think I would say, I don't think it's ethically okay.
Okay.
Because one, I think there's a better way to approach it,
Okay.
versus just saying citizens first. And then, to the point of self-evidence, as we were talking about earlier, right? When you have a human that's hungry, you feel the need to feed them. And if your supply is limited, then I don't know that citizens, because as a country, you've accepted the responsibility of letting these refugees come in.
Okay.
Right? So as a country, although you've not indoctrinated them as a citizen, you've taken them under your care. So if they're hungry, as the citizens are.
So keep in mind, this is a private food bank. It's not part of the government.
Oh, I see, okay.
Yeah. So what do you think? Anyone else?
Okay, so if it's
Yeah.
a private food bank, then I think it goes back to what we were talking about earlier,
Okay.
where we need to dig into what their worldview is.
Okay, but as it stands, let's say, whoever they are Germans, right? Like you kind of know their worldview in a sense. But as it stands, is it ethical or is it not ethical? That would really be the question. Like, how would you, like, let's say you run into, like, the president of the food bank. How would you convince him that, look, I don't think that's the right decision?
Well, to me, I would say, who does the president answer to? Like, if he was
I mean, he has like a board. So, okay, let's say the board is on board. Like, obviously, they had to approve it. That's how it works usually with food banks, right? Like, you have a board, you say this is a decision, and so the board says, okay, yeah, hey or nay. And so, let's say you had to convince the board. How would you convince the board that, the decision that you made was wrong? What do you think? Or anyone else. Anyone else is free to jump in. I mean, I'm not just trying to pick on him alone. Unless you disagree with him now and you want to change sides. I'm okay with that too. Yes?
Well, I mean, Germany is a Western country. Modernity built its modern state on the premise of, thinkers like Kant, and he's talking about, the courageous man is the free man that can make its own ethics.
Okay.
So basically, Germany, as a Western nation, their ethics is built on, a human decision of making what's ethical or it's not.
So okay, wait, okay. So I get that.
Yeah.
How would you convince the board? Let's go back to that.
Well, the idea is, it comes from the source, the bottom up. As a human, we are going to create, or we're going to say what's ethical or what's not. And basically, the in-group and out-group mentality, at these two things, what's ethical is to serve the German first. But
Okay.
this is all
So wait. You agree with that point?
I'm not agreeing with that, but
Right.
I'm trying to see their point of view.
Okay.
Because it's from the bottom, it's based on something that, as a Muslim, as
Yeah.
somebody that transcends this idea,
Sure.
ethics doesn't come from human being. Ethics is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us
Sure.
through His prophets. So to me, it's like, they're still playing in the human arena. We're transcending that. No, it's
Sure, right. So, but the question here isn't about Islam, and you're not making dawah. That's what I'm saying. How would you make dawah to the board? I'm saying, how would you convince the board of your position? And you understand that, and their backdrop is not Islam, obviously.
That's, humanism, the source of ethics, is fundamentally flawed.
It's flawed. Okay. Yes.
I would tell them that we should serve those folks most in need first.
Okay, so the first premise was, she's like, hello. The first premise was we're saying that they're all equally needy. So whether we're talking about the refugees or we're talking about the German citizens, they're equally poor. Like we're not entertaining disproportionate poverty. We're just saying they're equally poor. So in that case, how do you make that decision? Your food is limited. So they made the decision to say, well, if you're a German citizen, we will give you preference. So my question is, if you disagree with that, what do you bring to the table? Now I'll tell you the backdrop to this particular cognitive warm-up. There's a professor out of Harvard by the name of Michael Sandel. Anyone heard of him? So he has this series on YouTube where he recorded a whole semester of one of his classes. It's called Justice. What is the right thing to do? Anyways, so what he does is he engages his students with these ethical dilemmas, much like this. Okay, and the students kind of get into teams and they go back and forth. So he did that with this very question, and it was more, divided than you guys. You guys are everyone's just ganging up on Abdullah, and maybe he's got some help, maybe not. I don't know. Anyways, but needless to say, so he would go back and forth with how do we deal with this particular ethic. So one of the things that I did as maybe a bad parenting 101 is that I used to, and really the idea was I wanted my kids to kind of think more out of the box and think about ethical issues. So I would present them with all sorts of interesting philosophical dilemmas. So if you know about the trolley dilemma, for those of you who study philosophy, I'd present my kids with that. And so I presented my son, Abdullah, my oldest, with this particular one. And he sided with Abdullah, right? Maybe something with the name, I don't know. But anyway, so he sided with him. And so, we had other people, and he's a, how do I put this? He's a conservative anomaly, right? In generally people who are a little more liberal within the extended family, okay? So he always comes with, like Trump's not such a bad guy type guy, right? So anyway, where that came from, Allahu Alam, but we'll talk about that some other day. Okay, so I asked, so he said, no, I would support the Germans. I think that's justified. So I was like, okay, how would you do that? So he said to me, and this was an argument that came with some of the students that Dr. Michael Sandel had presented it to. He said that, Baba, let me ask you a question. If I was going hungry, and the neighbor's son was going hungry, and you had enough food for one person, who would you give it to? What do you think I said? Taban, the neighbors. No, I'm kidding. Right? So, no, I said, oh yeah, okay, I'd give it to you. Right? He goes, so just like that, familial relations determine, who are you going to give food to? Why shouldn't citizenship determine that? Those are your people too. Right? Yeah, exactly. Right. So okay, how would I answer that if I was on the other side? What do you think? Wait, you're on our side. What are you doing?
I had an answer.
No, man, you gotta stay on our side, or his side rather. I'm not taking the sides here. Yes, who had it? Yes.
So, this might seem a little harsh, but if you've got someone that's not helping themselves just because they're family, I may not help them. Like, they're capable and they're able to get a job or whatever. Like, I'm hungry and they've got their hand out. I'll give it to the neighbor's kid because they are disabled or what have you. Like, that familial relationship or citizenship in this case is not of intrinsic value to me. It's what are you putting towards this?
So if you have children and they're, starving, and the neighbors have children, you have food for just one, you'd give it to the neighbors.
Because they're children, that's different. They're really.
Well, that's what he's asking. He's like, look, I'm me, like he was a child at the time. He's 19 now and, has an attitude. That's besides the point. But anyways, but at the time, he was like, well, if I was going hungry as a child, we're talking about 10, 11 max. So in that case, what do you do? So he's saying, look, if that's the case with your children, you have a certain relationship with them, why wouldn't you have that relationship with a citizen? Yes.
Well, that, by answering it, you would say that that's just the nature of the food bank's heart, because they love their people more than they love the tourists that come there.
The what? The who?
Tourists.
Oh, the tourists. Okay. The refugees. Okay. All right. Fair enough. Okay. I like that. Tourists. All right. So let me just kind of conclude this because we have to get on to the course content. I was hoping for a more robust discussion, but maybe that lunch really hit home. Anyway, so interestingly enough, when Dr. Michael Sandin presented this to his course, his class, someone came up with this very same argument. Like, hey, your family, your family's first, right? Like when you're feeding them and so on and so forth, you have a responsibility to your family. If that's the case, why not then extend that to your citizens? The response that came out of that, which I almost fell off my seat when the woman said it, she says, this is why we have to dismember the structure of the family. The family should not be a unit because it's oppressive in nature. I was like, what? But the reality is that that's not as uncommon as you think. I mean, postmodernism is built upon that. If you think about the LGBTQ movement, it's built upon that as well, right? The whole pornography industry is built upon that. The breakdown of the family. So anyway, the point is that, I think that was a relatively good cognitive warm-up. And at the end, what happens is that both sides, and this is the thing that I think we can observe, are actually speaking from a fitra base, right? Because on one hand, it's part of your fitra to care for your family, right? It's natural. You have a family, you want to care for your family. On the other hand, you want justice, right? So that's also from the fitra. So now how do you adjudicate between which fitra concept are you going to choose, right? And this is where the blessings of Islam come in. That Allah has sent revelation down to say, okay, in this situation, you'll do X, Y, and Z. So there's a particular hadith, which I think is interesting. I'll just kind of go through it a bit quickly. So the Prophet ﷺ said that Allah gave the parable of the straight path as having walls on either side with several open doors over which curtains hang down. So I want you to picture this three-dimensionally. I've got a two-dimensional diagram coming up, but I want you to picture it three-dimensionally because it's a two-dimensional diagram does not do it justice. So, so Allah gave the parable of the straight path as having walls on either side with several open doors over which curtains hang. At the head of this path, now this is at the end of this path, okay? So again, three-dimensionally, this is the end of the path at the head. At the head of the path is one who invites people saying, "O people, enter the straight path and do not leave it." Another one is inviting from above the path. So again, three-dimensionally, end of the path, above the path, okay? So above the path, whenever a person wants to open one of these doors, the ladder, the one above the path, says to him, "Woe to you, do not open it, because if you open it, you shall enter." So then the Prophet ﷺ tells us, the straight path that he's speaking about is Islam. The walls are the hudud of Allah, the limits of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The open doors are the prohibited things. And the collar at the head of the path is the book of Allah. And the collar over the path is the admonisher from his Lord. In other words, you can interpret that to be the fitrah, the conscience. Every human has a conscience. So, why am I mentioning this? Because what happens when you do not have revelation to guide fitrah impulses? You will go to extremes, right? So, taking this as two-dimensional, you're going to be, the center is the middle path, the straight path, right? That's where your fitrah is, but your fitrah starts to now call you to say, okay, this is what you need to do, but then you overshoot, and then you start going towards the door, but then your fitrah calls you again, so you start zigzagging back to the other, then you overshoot again, and again, and again, so you go between right, left, conservative, liberal, whatever you want to call it, you're going to be going back and forth. The thing that stops you, prevents you from that, is revelation, is the book, right? Is the Quran and the Sunnah, basically, right? Without that, you can have an opinion that says familial relations, that's how we're going to decide everything, or familial relations should be completely destroyed because that's what's just. Again, both of them, their impulse is the fitrah. But how do you adjudicate? It's revelation. That make sense? Okay, that was just not really the main topic, but it was a side topic. All right, we finished the metaphysical backdrop in its entirety. Any questions before we move on? Anything that's lingering, we can tackle quickly. No?
So what's the right answer for the German?
Oh, that was just an exercise, man. I'm not going to give her an answer. It's not. It wouldn't be an exercise then. All right. Let's continue on with the nature of the heart. So, if you remember our components of a worldview, we talked about ontology, we talked about epistemology. This section, we're going to kind of zoom in onto anthropology. And remember, it wasn't the science of anthropology that I was talking about. It is who or what is the human being. This is important because once you understand who or what is the human being, it'll help you navigate certain, let's say, ethical and moral issues, all right? Certain doubts, specifically. So who or what is the human being? Let's start with, who are you? So who are you?
I'm slave of Allah.
Slave of Allah. Who are you? You can't copy him too, man. Because all right, who are you? Imam. Very good. Who are you? Samir. Okay. Who are you? Abdullah. Okay. Like literally two, right? Okay. Alhamdulillah. All right. Who are you? You're Abdullah too. MashaAllah. All right. So here's the thing. Before I get to identity metaphysics, when you ask the question of who are you, when you say that, I'm Abdullah, I'm Khalid, I'm a mother, I'm an accountant, whatever it might be, the question is really not about that. What I'm asking about, what makes you, you? So it's actually what we call an ontological question. Remember we said ontology is about what exists, what is being. So when I say, this is my hand, in that sentence, who is the my? If I say, this is my foot, who is the my that foot belongs to? So let's say, God forbid, I get into a car accident, right? And I lose my legs. Am I still me? I think so, right? Let's say I lose an arm. Am I still me? What makes me, me?
Your soul.
Okay, maybe. All right. Let me get into this. So there's something known as identity metaphysics, and there's an interesting thought experiment which is known as the ship of Theseus, if I pronounce that correctly. And it gets into kind of what do we mean by the question of, what exists, who am I? Okay, so we want to ask a question about the ship of Theseus. And the way this works is you have this ship that belongs to Theseus, who was a guy, whatever. And so what happens is the ship's maybe it's getting a bit old, so they take a board out of the ship and they put it on the side and they replace it with another board. Okay? Now, they do this over and over again. One board they put on the side and they replace it with another board. Now they keep on doing this until all the boards and all the components of the initial ship have been replaced. And they've taken the old components and they've put a ship together. So here's the question. Which one is the ship of Theseus?
Whichever one he's the captain.
I mean, the what? What's up? What?
The one he has the pink slip too.
Fair enough. Ontologically, which one is the ship of Theseus? And there's no right answer here, to be honest. Yeah.
Well, I think it's the old one because his ship is whatever he went trips in it, so it has what this ship struggled with him in his life path or whatever. So that's his ship. That's
Okay.
what it has, like,
All right. Yeah.
A summary of all of them put together.
So both ships are the ship of Theseus.
Yeah, for the same reason that it's
Okay.
a summary of all of his experiences.
Okay. Fair enough. Yeah.
I feel like you're talking about persistence of identity.
Yeah.
And basically, a human being body, because, who am I is actually a combination of a lot of things. And when we look at the human being body, the cells are changing Some of them last for a day, some of them last for,
True.
so wherever it's changing. So Khalid that was 5 years old. Is it Khalid now that he's 50? I don't remember my age now. But I'm just saying, it's that persistence of identity. It has the social aspect, it has the biological aspect, it has the intellectual aspect. It's not a simple thing.
Okay, all right, fair enough. So, Jazakallah khair. When we're speaking about identity metaphysics, the point of me mentioning this is really to say that it's not simply a matter of your physical reality, and I think that's what you were getting at, right? We have something more than our physical body that makes us who we are, okay? And this is very important. And we get into what I call Islamic pneumatology. Don't worry about the term, okay? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا تَكُونُوا كَالَّذِينَ نَسُوا اللَّهَ فَأَنْسَاهُمْ أَنفُسَهُمْ. Do not be like those who forgot Allah, so He made them forget themselves. So here's the question. If you think about the quintessential type of person who's forgotten Allah, in a sense, who would that be? Like, who is a person that says, you know what, disregarding Allah, like just forgotten Allah, just I have no regard for Allah. Who would that be? An atheist, right? Exactly. Allah says that do not be like those who forgot Allah, so Allah caused them to forget themselves. So does an atheist forget to like brush his teeth in the morning? Does he not have hopes and ambitions? Does he not want to go to school, get a job? What does it mean that Allah caused them to forget themselves? Yeah.
You start like questioning basic reality, like biology, and start with like transgenderism and whatnot.
No, you've gone way ahead. That's not what I'm talking about at all. It's much more simpler than that. What I'm saying is, when they've forgotten themselves, does it mean that they don't really care about themselves? Is that what that means? Or does it mean something a level deeper than that? Yeah. Sorry, wait, I think it was... Let her go and I'll let you go, inshallah. Yeah. Sorry? Okay, so in other words, Allah caused them to forget themselves in the sense that, what is your true self? We have to ask the question. Your fitrah, but which is also connected to what I would say, your ruh. In other words, we are not just physical beings, we have a soul, we have a ruh. And your true identity is intimately linked with your ruh. You cannot say we are just material matter, all right? When a person forgets themselves, they're forgetting the fact that their true nature is one that has to be connected with the divine. It has to be, okay? We'll get into this a little bit further in just a second. All right. So, Adam alayhi salam. Let's start right at the beginning. So, Anas reports that the Prophet ﷺ mentions, when Allah fashioned Adam in paradise, He left him as long as He willed to leave him there. Then Iblis roamed around him to see exactly what actually this creature was. And when he found him hollow from within, he recognized that Adam had been created with a disposition that he would have control over himself. Now, your ethical and moral ability to choose things is rooted in your ruh. Your consciousness is part of your ruh. Your physical desires of eating, sleeping, drinking is part of your material constitution. Okay? So, in a sense, you have desires much like the animal kingdom has desires. To eat, to drink, to have relations. But it's only the human being, because they have a ruh, that you can choose to go against those desires. And this is specifically for the human being only. Animals don't have that. Angels do not have that. In other words, free choice. Whatever they're commanded, they do. Okay? This puts the human being in a very specific category. Because now, by way of making a free choice, you can make a choice and become better than the angels, or you can succumb to desires and become even worse than animals. You with me so far? Okay. All right. So, I mentioned this ayah in the Quran related to Adam alayhi salam in terms of when were the angels told to bow down to Adam? We know that they were told to bow down to him. It was only once the soul was placed in the body. It wasn't the shell. Because remember, the hadith here mentioned that there was a shell that was initially created, a physical structure that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created. So when the angels were told, bow down to Adam, were they told to bow down to just the shell? No. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَإِذَا سَوَيْتُهُ وَنَفَخْتُ فِيهِ مِنْ رُوحِي فَقَعُوا لَهُ سَاجِدِينَ When I have proportioned him, breathed into him the ruah, then you will fall down in prostration to him. So the ruah becomes, in essence, your primary identity. Your primary identity is spiritual, is kind of the point I'm trying to make here. Okay? Okay. So, we all have, I know people are going to start reading this, so let me not get there. We all have consciousness. Okay? You have an inner subjective state and an inner subjective consciousness. Correct? All right. Who knows what that means? What did I just say? Everyone's like, lunch was good. Right? What do I mean?
You have the ability to think and make a decision.
Okay.
To be aware,
To be aware.
aware of what's around.
Okay. Where do we find physically our consciousness? If you're just on a purely physical, where do we find it? Do we? It's not what they say. Interesting enough, it's what's known as the hard problem of consciousness. Scientifically, it's something they it's a nut they can't crack. Because what they're saying is you have the physical, let's say, brain, but how do you know, is it in a cell? Like, where is consciousness? You have an inner subjective, let's say, experience. What are you drinking? Coffee. When you drink coffee, there is something that you have an inner subjective experience of that I could never access. That's specifically you, right? Or let's take a different example. Let's say my mother, she bakes a chocolate cake. Okay, I taste the chocolate cake. What it's like for me to taste the chocolate cake, I can describe it to you, but there's no way for you to know what it's like for me to experience that chocolate cake. You could eat it and experience it, but I don't know if our experiences are the same. You have an inner subjective experience that is not housed in any sort of brain or anything like that. That inner subjective consciousness, what I'm saying is part of your ruah. It's connected to your ruah. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala placed His ruah in you, part of that means you have a consciousness. You can be conscious of things. You have an inner subjective state. You can experience things. And that experience, it's linked to the body, but it's not such that you know where it is. You can't say, okay, this cell here, this is consciousness. Right? Okay. Now, remember earlier on I was saying, when I was talking about the heart, the fitrah covering, and the Quranic kind of experiencing of an ayah. So I'm going to try to do this. Let's see if it works. So there's a phenomena that occurs in the Quran, what is known as iltifat. You guys know what that is? So sorry?
Say it again, please.
Iltifat. No, it's araf iltifat. No, okay, so basically it's grammatical shifts. Okay? So in other words, when you go through the Quran, you'll notice that sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will shift either number or person. So sometimes Allah will start off with like in the singular, then He'll move to the dual. English, we don't have dual in English, but in Arabic you have a dual, right? So He'll move from the singular to the dual to the plural back to the singular. Sometimes He'll move from first person to second person to third person. So the question arises, why would He do that, and is there a significance to that? So I want us to kind of think about these next few ayat from that perspective. And it's connected to the ruh and consciousness. Okay? Because remember, I'm saying that the ruh is where you'll find consciousness, where you are able to be conscious of things. Okay? So let's start off. In Surah Sajda, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, الَّذِي أَحْسَنَ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ خَلَقَهُ وَبَدَأَ خَلْقَ الْإِنسَانِ مِنْ طِينٍ. It is He who perfected everything, which He created and began the creation of man from clay. So let me stop here for a second. Everyone know the difference between first person, second person, and third person? Let's say in English. So what's first person? I. What's second person? You. What's third person? He, she, it, they. Good. Okay. What is this in? First person, second person, third person? Third person. Very good. Third person. ثُمَّ جَعَلَ نَسْلَهُ مِنْ سُلَالَةٍ مِّن مَّاءٍ مَّهِينٍ. Then he made his posterity out of an extract of a liquid disdained. First person, second person, third person. What is it? Still in third person. Then he continues on. He says, ثُمَّ سَوَّاهُ وَنَفَخَ فِيهِ مِنْ رُوحِ. And then he proportioned him and breathed into him his ruh. First person, second person, third person. We're still in third person. Allah then says, وَجَعَلَ لَكُمْ السَّمْعَ وَالْأَبَصَارَ وَالْأَفْئِدَةَ. And then made for you hearing, seeing, and thinking. First person, second person, third person. Second person. Why is that significant? Here's why it's significant. Up to this point, Allah is speaking about the creation. He's speaking about creating this thing. It's only until he comes to ثُمَّ سَوَّاهُ وَنَفَخَ فِيهِ مِنْ رُوحِ. And then he portions him, breathes into him the ruh. Now that you have your ruh, وَجَعْلَ لَكُمْ. Now we can speak to you because you have a consciousness. It's quite mind-blowing when you really think about it, that the subtleties of the Quran come up like this. Once you have a consciousness, now we can now speak to you. That's why he says, وَجَعْلَ لَكُمْ. There's a reason for that. It was third person this entire time because this is speaking about man, speaking about the creation, speaking about, your material reality. Once you have a ruh, now you can be addressed. Make sense? I thought it was pretty cool. I don't know if you guys did, but maybe it was, I don't know. I'm a bit nerdy like that. Okay, let's move on. So, remember I was talking about the distinct, like what distinguishes human beings from others. So this sort of tripartite division, Ibn al-Qayyim speaks about it, Imam al-Ghazali speaks about it, many people have spoken about it. So we know, for instance, angels, humans, animals. So we said animals have desires, and whatever they desire, they go with, right? There's no sort of moral code. You don't find like a lion chasing down a gazelle, and in the middle of the chase, the gazelle says, "Stop! I find what you're doing morally reprehensible. Please stop chasing me." That's not how that works, right? It's just they work on instinct, yeah? Similarly, angels do whatever they've been ordered. It's only the human being that has that choice to be able to choose to do X or do Y. Morally, in other words. There's a moral choice. And one of the greatest kind of manifestations of that is the concept of patience. Angels do not have to exhibit patience. Animals do not have to exhibit patience. Patience only becomes a reality when you have a choice to either do something or not do something. And that's why one of the things that Allah kind of elevates and praises is the concept of sabr. Inna Allah ma'a sabirin. Allah is with the patient, with those who have sabr, right? Inna Allah yuhibbu sabirin. Allah loves them. Why? Because it's only by way of sabr, which is only a human characteristic, that you're able to elevate yourself and become better than the angels. Or you lack sabr, you succumb to your desires, and you fall below even the animals. All right? How much time is left before Ramadan comes? People don't like when I ask that. How many? 58 days, right? So, let me talk a little bit about Ramadan for a second. You'll be like, what does that have to do with this? But I'm going to tie it together, inshallah. When we reach Ramadan, what is the thing that Ramadan is generally known for? Like if you ask a non-Muslim, what do Muslims do in Ramadan? Fasting. Yeah, it's pretty straightforward, okay? What's the benefit of fasting? Taqwa. Okay, what if you were talking to a non-Muslim? What's the benefit of fasting? Self-control. What else?
Health benefits.
Health benefits. Okay. If you want to get jacked, okay. All right, fair enough. Patience. Okay. What else? Empathy. Okay. So what it's like for people. Okay, very good. Those are all great reasons. So here's what I want you to think about for a second now. In the day, you're not eating, right? What should you be doing at night? Eating? Okay, I mean, I said, what should you be doing? I'm asking normatively, what should you be doing? Sleeping? At night. Exactly, he got it, right? Praying, right? But what is praying with what? What are we using? What is the tool? Quran, right? That's what I'm trying to get at. So here's the thing. If you were to think about kind of the human constitution like a horse and a rider, okay? So the horse is your material body. The rider is your ruh, okay? When you think about when you need sustenance for your body, where does it come from? Where do you get food from? Ultimately, where does it come from? The earth, right? Like it doesn't come from outer space, right? You get it from the earth, yeah? Okay. What's the source of your material body? The earth. So if you want to support your material body, you get it from its source, right? Okay. But we just got done saying that the human being is also what? Spiritual, ruh, right? He has a ruh. When you want to strengthen and give your body sustenance, you're going to get it from its source. What is the source of the ruh? Okay. What does Allah say is the source? Now ultimately everything is the source of Allah. Okay. Right, exactly. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الرُّوحِ. They ask you concerning the ruh. قُلْ, say, الرُّوحِ مِنْ أَمْرِ رَبِّي. Say that the ruh is from the command of my Lord. Okay? How does Allah give commands? Well, okay, revelation, but how? What does he do to give those commands? إِذَا قَضَى أَمْرًا فَإِنَّمَا يَقُولُ لَهُ كُن فَيَكُونُ. Whenever Allah commands a matter, decrees a matter, He says to it, be. So when we're asking, and it is, Jazakallah khair, and it is, whenever Allah decrees, so the source of the ruh, Allah says, الروح من أمر ربي. It is from the command of Allah. How does Allah issue commands? It's by His word. Do we have access to His word? Kalam Allah, Quran, right? The dynamic in Ramadan is such. It's like Allah is saying, 11 months out of the year, remember that horse and that rider I was speaking about? 11 months out of the year, you're feeding the horse. Okay? And the horse is really strong, so it's taking you wherever it wants to go. But this 1 month out of the year, O Muslim, this is the time you need to now strengthen the rider and weaken the horse. So what do you do in Ramadan? During the day, you take the food away from the horse. You limit the horse, the strength of the horse during the day. And what do you do at night? You strengthen the rider. It's Quran at night and fasting in the day, right? So when you think about the dynamic of Ramadan, it's actually a kind of almost like a metaphor for the idea of the human being, how it should conduct itself, right? So, that being the case, that's a nice kind of, I'm hoping, example of Ramadan. Now, I'm not going to get too deep into this because this is Ayat an-Nur and we don't have time to cover it, so I'm going to have to skip it. What I'm going to do is just give you the summary. So we've spoken about the ruh, the nafs are your desires. How does that impact your heart? Okay, so now just take my word for it. This is kind of a diagram of Ayat an-Nur. Ayat an-Nur is found in Surah an-Nur. The ayah is Allahu nuru samawati wal ard mathalu nurihi kamishkat ila al-akhirih. So because I have to kind of go a little quicker, when you think about your heart, you have a ruh in a sense that's pushing outwards to connect with Allah. Okay? Desires are kind of pushing towards it. They're pushing you towards a dunya. They're pushing you towards, kind of fulfilling your desires and whatever it might be. Those come from your material constitution. The ruh wants to connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Its source of sustenance, remember we just said the ruh is revelation. The nafs is having one impact on the heart, the ruh is having an opposite impact on the heart. So the heart even the physical heart, is always in a state of motion, right? In fact, the word for heart, qalb, yuqallibu, right? It's always overturning. It's always in a state of motion. Someone asked earlier about iman going up and down. It's part of the reality of the human being. The heart is of such a nature. Now here's the thing. When we were talking about the fitrah being covered and the heart being covered, where do those covers come from? And this is going to be very important when we understand doubts and spirituality. Ma'siyah. They come from sins. That's one source. Remember, the Prophet ﷺ, and I don't know if I have this in a slide. Yes. The Prophet ﷺ says that verily, when the servant commits a sin, a black mark appears upon his heart. If he abandons the sin and seeks forgiveness and repents, then his heart will be polished. If he returns to sin, the blackness will be increased until it overcomes its heart, and it is the covering that Allah has mentioned, no, rather a covering over their hearts for what they have earned. Right? Rana ala qulubihim. Right? So it is. So what are we seeing here? Let me go back to the diagram here real quick. This in the ayah that I did not get too deep into, the heart is given the example of of glass in that particular ayah. Okay? So the heart is glass, the ruh is the flame in the glass, and the fitrah is the fuel, right? Not the fuel, what's it called? The olive oil. Okay, for those who know the ayah. Point being is, if we understand the heart to be glass, when you put a black mark on glass, what happens? So you guys have like Glade candles and stuff? When you have them on for too long, what happens? They get blackened, right? If you start to sin more and more and more, the heart, like glass, gets blackened. So when revelation starts to now come in, it cannot see revelation as truth anymore. Are you with me so far? And this is why we're saying that when you are now inviting someone to Islam, you're calling them to be closer to Allah, it is not simply a rational argument. There are spiritual realities you have to take into consideration. You were asking earlier about, okay, Quran, sometimes, I can read it. This is part of that dynamic. When we talk about sin has an impact on how you are going to come to the Quran, how you are able to understand the ayat, and so on and so forth. In fact, I think it was Imam Shafi'i who went to one of his teachers and said, I'm having trouble, remembering things. And he said, well, give me some advice. He said, stop sinning, right? Or sin less. Bizabt, right? So sins have an impact on how you're able to go about and deal with doubts. Okay? All right. Now that dynamic, hopefully we have. All right. Now, I want to just mention these 7, what Ibn Taymiyyah calls 7 infirmities of the fitrah. Kind of some of the sources of doubts. So number 1, he says, accepting inherited beliefs. Right? My father was upon this. My forefathers were upon this. In today's context, maybe it would be something like liberalism. 2, following whims, preconceived biases, and stubbornly clinging to personal opinion in the face of countervailing evidence. Hawa. When we're going to come up with this, I think we're going to cover this later, but when we are talking about doubts, now we're moving specifically to shubuhat, we're talking about doubts themselves, understand that a person moves away from Islam due to either intellectual doubts, which we call shubuhat, or what we call shahwat, desires. It has nothing to do with their intellectually doubting X, Y, and Z. And I'll tell you this is true from experience. So we have, I don't know if I mentioned this, Lighthouse Mentoring. It's a free service online. A person can book a free 1-hour session. And I think I mentioned this last night, but there's basically 4 categories of people we are able to give free mentoring to. Number 1, ex-Muslims, people that have left Islam. Number 2, Muslims that are having doubts. Number 3, non-Muslims. And number 4, someone that wants to know how to deal with the first 3 categories. Okay? I can't tell you, we've been doing this for 3 years. We have 3 years of data on these 3 categories. All right? So this is these are free sessions, 1 hour each, anywhere in the world. I can tell you maybe 90% of the time, someone will, because when you fill in the application, you have to fill in what you're suffering through, what's the problem. Most of the time, the person will fill in some sort of intellectual doubt that they think they're having, and most of the time, maybe even 90% of the time, it doesn't have to do with a shubha or an intellectual doubt, it is a shahwa. It is some sort of desire, something else that's blocking them. Most of the time. Okay, so, hawa, engaging in conjecture, zan, entertaining doubts or confessions caused by specious objections, shubuhat, which I was just mentioning, harbor ulterior motives or personal interests, gharad, following habit, ada, blindly without reflection, and then engaging in blind imitation, taqleed. Okay. So, I'm actually going to skip some of this too because we've kind of already spoken about it. All right, so we spoke about shahawat, we spoke about shubuhat. Remember I said there are two main diseases, two main illnesses of the heart. Ibn al-Qayyim mentions fitnas of two types, the fitna of shubuhat, this one being the greater of the two, and the fitna of shahawat. Now I want to qualify this for a second. I know it's coming from Ibn al-Qayyim, al-Jawziyah, rahimahullah, but there are certain things, like he says, the fitna of shubuhat, this is being the greater of the two than shahawat. But a persistent shahwa, if it keeps on going, can become a shubha. Why? Because if someone is doing something wrong, let's come to reality for a second, right? Someone is, I don't know, let me take something extreme, addicted to pornography, right? Eventually, or not eventually, initially they're going to say, you know what, this is really wrong. I should really turn this off. I really need to stop doing this. The problem is human beings cannot just stay in a state of guilt. You can't just be like, this is wrong, but I'll keep doing it. What happens is eventually you have to give some sort of intellectual reasoning for doing what you're doing. So you start coming up with reasons, excuses, right? And so those shahwat, because you're justifying it by way of reason, eventually end up becoming shubuhat. Is everyone with me so far? Right? So it's not just a simple, binary here, shubuhat, shahwat, so this is greater than the other one, because shahwat can lead to shubuhat. No human can be in a state, they're guilty about it, and just stay in that state. Either they're going to reason, or they're going to come back to Allah, make tawbah, or whatever it might be. You cannot just be like, I'll stay in this state and be like this for 10 years. Eventually you'll come up with the reasons. And I'm sure that if you have spoken to people who are doubting some element of Islam, you will sense that within them. Okay? At least I have. So someone will be talking about, like I remember one time we one of my wife's relatives, nothing against her, but anyway, she's not here so I can say that. Anyway, so they had called me over, they said, look, one of the uncles, he's left Islam and he's telling other people to leave Islam too. He's an atheist. So can you come talk to him? So I was like, okay. So I go to their house, and if you want to talk about the worst setting ever, this would be it. Because what they did was, they had these two chairs set up in the middle of the living room, and all the relatives in sofa around me, and me and him in these two chairs in the middle. So I was like, this is the dumbest thing you could do, right? Like, why would you do this? Anyway, so we went back and forth. I went to all sorts of arguments. Argument from, objective morality, argument from dependency, argument, like, all the way through. And then, we were in the kitchen afterwards, right? It didn't go anywhere. Just obviously it didn't, because, number one, when you're in that scenario, the one thing that's blocking you is your ego. Right? So if all those people around you, you're not going to be like, you know what? Yes, you're right. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. This is not going to happen, right? Anyway, so we're in the kitchen later, and he says to me, he says, I have a challenge for you, one that I don't think you can meet. I was like, okay, bismillah. Well, what is your challenge? He said, tell me of a dua that I can make and Allah will answer it. Not in the akhirah. Not in the akhirah. He answers it right now. I mean, awalan, look at how arrogant he is, right? Like that's the first thing. Like, oh, answer right now. I said, if I give you a dua like this, will you come to Islam? Will you accept Islam? He says, yes, if you can give me a dua like this, he goes, I've been asking Allah for so many things, Allah never answered my dua. A'udhu billah, right? Just like, subhanallah. I said, okay, here's the dua I want you to make. I want you, and you have to be sincere. You can't just, just on a whim or whatever. Sincere dua, I want you to say, oh Allah, guide me. Right? You know what he said? No, not that one. I was like, you just said one that's answered in this dunya. If you're sincere, then make that dua. He said, no, not that one, right? So my point in mentioning that is that sometimes, shahuwat can become shubuhat because you have to justify it, right? And this individual, believe me, he was going around in circles trying to justify it. At the end, later on when we were having dinner, he said, you know what I love about, leaving Islam? He goes, I can go to Vegas and enjoy myself like crazy. I was like, okay. I was like, you're going to go broke pretty soon, man, but okay. Whatever you want, man. Okay. So let's quickly get into what do we mean by shubuhat. So a shubha is called a shubha because it resembles the truth. So tushbihu. Okay? And this is important. Why is understanding this particular point important? Because a lot of times when we look at doubts, we assume they have some basis, some truth, some reality. They do not. They're called shubuhat because they look like the truth. That's why they're called shubuhat, right? They resemble the truth. They're close, but they're not the truth. And so that's why they actually don't have any sort of real value at the end. Okay? So, as Ibn Taymiyyah mentions, he says, every significant belief usually contains an element of truth, shubha min al-haq. Since if that wasn't the case, such views would not have been circulated. You can't go against the fitrah at the end of the day. You have to have something that attracts the person, right? You have to have some sort of sugar that you're going to put around whatever it is before you give the guy the poison directly, all right? Okay. So, very quickly, the term shubha, and I'll mention this as quick as I possibly can. So, in Surah Al-Baqarah, just to give you an example, if you remember, in Surah Al-Baqarah, when Musa alayhi salam goes to Bani Israel, and he says, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَأْمُرُكُمْ أَن تَذْبَحُوا بَقْرَةً. Right? Allah has ordered you to slaughter a cow. So what did Bani Israel do? They say, oh, سَمِعْنَا وَطَعْنَا, yes, and they took it and they slaughtered it? No. What happened? Who remembers? Start asking questions, right? Like, okay, so what kind of cow, what color cow, and this and that, and what's the... Eventually, argumentative question, right? And making things difficult for themselves anyway, but they're asking this question and that question and all these other things. Eventually, they come to this statement, say, قَالُ اُدْعُ لَنَا رَبَّكَ يُبَيِّن لَنَا مَا هِيَ إِنَّ الْبَقَرَ تَشَابَهَ عَلَيْنَا. So, call upon your Lord to make clear to us to what it is. تَشَابَهَ عَلَيْنَا. All of these cows, تَشَابَهَ, meaning that they're so similar, we can't tell the difference between one cow and another cow. They're con-similar. Okay? When you're looking at shubuhat, they're so similar to the truth sometimes, you may not be able to tell the difference, right? And you may think that they actually have some sort of value, but in essence they don't. I'll give you one more in terms of the term shubha, just because we're... So, in Surah Al-Imran, let me give you a backdrop to this. You mind if I do that? Just to kind of bring it home a little bit. We were having this this debate with a Christian. So generally, I don't, in the States, I know the Brits love to do debates. In the States, I'm not really a big fan of debates, okay? But when I do them, I try to be as, non-abrasive as possible, okay? So in this particular debate, we were talking about how do you understand your religious text? In other words, if I say the Bible says this and you say the Bible says this, how are we going to decide what does the Bible really say, right? And by the way, as a method, I don't really use the Bible in my da'wah, just because it doesn't make any sense for me to come and say your Bible says this. There's a psychological problem when you do that, because it's as if you're saying, like, I know your Bible better than you know your Bible. I always tell Muslims, imagine someone coming to you and say, the Quran says this. You'd be like, who are you to tell me what the Quran says, right? What do you know? So I generally don't use it. But the point was that how do you as a Christian What are the tools you use to interpret the Bible? Because you can understand a verse like this, you can understand a verse like this. Jews understand a verse like this, and you understand a verse like this, and you guys are reading the same book, right? So what do you use? What are the hermeneutical tools that you use? So what happened was, he says, okay, I said, your tools basically are, let's say the church and, people. That's basically what you use. He said, okay, what tools do you use when you're doing the tafsir of the Quran? He didn't say tafsir, I'm saying that, right? But anyways, how do you understand the Quran? I said the principles of tafsir, usulu tafsir, are derived from the Quran itself. And this kind of shook him a little bit, right? Because he said, wait, so how you understand the Quran is from the Quran itself? I said, yes. One of those principles is found in this ayah. So let's take a look at it. In Surah Al-Imran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَالَّذِي أَنزَلَ عَلَيْكَ الْكِتَابِ مِنْهُ آيَاتٌ مُحْكَمَاتٌ هُنَّ أُمُّ الْكِتَابِ وَأُخَرُ مُتَشَابِهَاتٌ فَأَمَّا الَّذِينَ فِي قُلُوبِهِمْ زَيْغٌ فَيَتَّبِعُونَ مَا تَشَابَهَ مِنْهُ. Right? Okay? So it is He who has sent down the book. In it are verses that are precise. Muhkam. Muhkam means to be locked in place. Okay? Like you can't, this is, and when you say muhkam, you're talking about something that you can't say it means this and it means this. It's very clear. Okay? And then Allah says, there's other ayat that are mutashabihat. Again, that same three letters, sheen, ba, ha. Okay? Meaning that these verses are so close in meaning that you cannot tell, okay, which one is it? How do you adjudicate? How do you decide which meaning am I supposed to go with? It goes back to the muhkamat. So let me give an example to kind of elucidate this point. Let's say you pull up to you guys have 7-Elevens here? Yeah. You do? Okay. You pull up with your friend to a 7-Eleven and you look at the sign and the sign says closed. You're not going to go to your friend and be like, what do you think that means? Right? It's muhkam, it's clear, it's explicit. There's no I don't know, man, that's a tough one. How are we going to figure that one out? That's not how that works, right? It's very clear, it's explicit. There are ayat that are clear. Now, you may have another scenario where it's not, it could mean this or it could mean that. I'll give you another example. So, imagine now that a Christian comes to you and they say, well, your Quran has the Trinity in it. I'm like, well, what do you mean? He said, Bismillah, Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim. See, 3. So what? So your Quran has a Trinity. So okay, let's take that into consideration. Let's say that, you've got your interpretation, you have my interpretation, that Allah is one. How are you going to adjudicate? You're going to take this, shubha, right? This mutashabih, if you want to call it that, and you will take an ayah that is muhkam. For instance, قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ. Right? Allah is one. So my interpretation is these are attributes of Allah and of one God. Your interpretation is 3 gods. How do we decide? An ayah that is explicit. Okay, and this is part of usul tafsir, right? That when you have these ayat, which you're trying to decide, does it mean this or does it mean that? You are informed of the meaning of that by other ayat. That's why a tafsir of the Quran, you cannot say it's complete unless you've done tafsir of the Quran bil Quran. Okay? Is that clear? Just as a principle now. My point in mentioning that was the term mutashabihat. 2 things that are very similar, hard to tell what's what and what's not what. Okay? All right, moving. All right, so I'm going to skip that. I'm going to skip that as well. Let's move on quickly to sources of doubts. There are 3 kind of main sources. Number 1, you can say moral and social concerns. Number 2, philosophical and scientific concerns. And number 3, personal trauma. Okay, so if we were going to categorize them, it'd be 3 kind of categories. All right, moral and social concerns. So there's a bunch of things that and this is taken from an article by Yaqeen Institute. Moral and social concerns, teachings about the role of women. Someone may say, okay, well, I don't really agree with that. I'm not sure if that doesn't fit with my ethic, my moral, whatever it might be. The hypocrisy of religious people, that is the non-religious behavior of supposedly religious individuals. Has anyone really experienced this before? Yeah? So I experienced it very early on. I won't say which masjid I went to, but I remember, and this is very early in my Islam, I remember going to a certain masjid and I just started practicing. In fact, I was very new, and I went inside this masjid and someone was praying and I didn't realize it at all, but I passed in front of them. And honestly, I did not realize that I passed in front of this guy while he was praying. All right, it's my bad. He comes up to me and he says, "You need to fear Allah, brother." I was like, "What?" Like I was. What do you mean? He's like, "You crossed in front of me. Like, don't you have any shame? Don't you realize that someone's praying, you just cross right in front of them? Don't you know the Prophet ﷺ said such and such," and goes off on a tirade, right? Tirade. Anyways, however you say it. So, goes off. And I always told myself, I will never go back to that masjid, right? And yeah, maybe it was an immature way of looking at it, but a lot of times what happens is that the sources of doubts have to do with people's behaviors in the masjid. People that are supposedly religious, and I use that term loosely because we already diagnosed what I mean. Okay, number 3, bad things that people do in the name of religion, right? So when people talk about terrorism and things like that, the intolerism that some religious people show towards other faiths, the way that religious people sometimes insist that there's only one right way to practice their faith, right? And this happens a lot when people are kind of stuck with certain fiqh realities, right? Like, this is how you're going to pray and that's it, khalas, I'm not going to entertain any other way. It happens. Okay, the intolerance that some religious people show towards certain other people. For example, homosexuals. Okay, under the category of philosophical and scientific concerns, the debate over evolution versus creation, uncertainty over the existence of God, the problem of evil and unfinished suffering in the world, feeling that certain religious beliefs or practices do not make sense. Now the third is personal trauma, finding that being religious does not make one happy. And I can't tell you how many times we get calls at Lighthouse Mentoring, and this is their concern. Like, I've been praying to Allah, I do everything I need to do, but I'm still not feeling it. I'm not happy. Like, it's not giving me happiness. Not feeling welcome in your faith community. The death of a loved one. So all of these can come under personal trauma. All right. Let's go with 10 strategies. I'm going to try to get through them, as many of them as I can. So how much time do we? We actually don't have time, do we? Before the break? I know someone told me that. When is Asr? Is that 3?
No.
3 o'clock? All right, let's go ahead and break here. We'll come back and then we'll go through the 10 strategies and we'll call it a day, inshallah. Because I want to give you time to make wudu and stuff like that. These 10 strategies, right before you leave, there are some that come before the doubt happens, some that come after the doubt, and some that come before or after the doubt. So just understand that when we have these strategies, it's going to depend on when that doubt happens, right? So some are to prepare you against or inoculate you against being affected by doubts, and some are once the doubt has come in, what do you do then? Okay, so that's where we're going to end, inshallah, today off with, and hopefully you'll find that a bit lighter than this morning's session. Bi-idhnillah. Okay, let's go and stop there and we'll go for Asr and come back, inshallah.